Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about this camera right here, the Canon RP, and this is a full frame mirrorless camera that is really priced to be competitive with entry-level, smaller sensored cameras, which is crazy. And not only that, but when you look at the other current full frame options that are out there, this is priced way below that. And I think really it gives you some professional quality results at an amazing price point. So a little bit about me and what I do mostly content creation, so photos and videos that are going on social media platforms, YouTube, that kind of thing, of course, for myself and my own personal work, but also for clients that then tend to use that for their social media marketing. I also do a little bit of portrait work, but today I'm going to look at this camera, give you my thoughts on the value of this camera, the performance of this camera, and whether I think it might be worth the price. This camera's been out for a while, so I'm not going to go super in-depth with the specs. Of course, you can look that up if you want to, but just a quick overview. It's a 26.2 megapixel sensor. It's mirrorless, so your autofocus points cover like 88% of the sensor. And while we're talking about autofocus, it has Canon's dual pixel autofocus, not only on the back of the screen, but again, because it's mirrorless, inside the electronic viewfinder as well, which I think is amazing. For photos, we can shoot up to 5 frames per second continuous, but if you want to put it in tracking priority, which you probably do so that you can be more confident that your photos are going to be in focus, it slows it down to 2.6 frames per second, which of course isn't very fast. For video, we can shoot 4K up to 24 frames per second, but you probably have already heard the 4K has a pretty big crop. It's like 1.74 times. And also in 4K on this camera, you lose dual pixel autofocus and you're going to be using an older, slower, less accurate contrast-based autofocus. If you do want to film in full frame and film with dual pixel autofocus, you can do that at 1080, and at 1080 we can film up to 60 frames per second with both full frame and dual pixel autofocus. And for memory, we only have one SD card slot on this camera. So as far as ergonomics go on this camera, it is very small. There is a grip extension. It's not a battery grip, but it does extend the grip a little bit like it says. And I really thought that I was going to need or at least want that. But I mean, I have kind of skinny fingers, and once I got it, they actually just barely fit on there, just barely. And for a camera that is as small and compact as this is, it's actually really comfy. The grip is, yes, small, but also pretty deep. So the camera itself is really comfy. If you do have bigger fingers, then sure, you will probably want to get the grip extension. But again, for the size, it is a really comfortable grip. And that's really important for something that you literally hold in your hand all day. I think the importance of how comfortable a camera is gets overlooked quite a lot. And again, it's going to affect how you shoot and how often you shoot and whether you want to shoot when you pick up your camera. The battery in this camera is the LPE17, which is smaller and typically gets used in like the Canon Rebel series of entry-level cameras. If you are going to be shooting a lot, really if you're just going to be using this camera, I definitely suggest that you pick up extra batteries. The EVF on this camera is a little small compared to some full frame cameras, but it's actually really nice EVF, and using it, I have had no problems or complaints with it whatsoever. We also have the fully articulating vari-angle flip-out screen, which honestly, just completely objectively, is by far the most versatile option for a back screen. Some people might not like it the best, but it is objectively the most versatile because you can get the most shooting angles out of it. We do have a physical mode dial on this camera to choose which mode you're shooting in. We also have, of course, your shutter dial, your aperture dial, and if you have RF lenses, then you have the control ring on the front of those to use. There is no joystick on the back of the camera for choosing your autofocus point, but we have the awesome Canon touch and drag system where you can just use your thumb on the back of the screen, even when you're using the viewfinder to select your focus point. And I actually really love this system. I think it works really well. And for anyone that's coming to a full frame camera for the first time, especially if you're coming from using your phone or something like that, it's going to be really intuitive and just an easy step from your phone into using a camera like this. As far as ports, we have a mic and a headphone input, which is really awesome for video shooters. We have a remote shutter, we have USB-C and HDMI out, it's mini HDMI, and you do have the ability to charge this camera through the USB-C port. It does not, however, come with a USB-C charging cable, and you have to have a USB-C charging cable that delivers power. So if you do have something like a MacBook Pro or something that uses a USB-C charger, you can use that with this camera. Now, overall, I really like the ergonomics of this camera, especially considering how comfortable it is for the small size. But one of the biggest cons for me is the placement of the SD card, which is in the same spot as the battery. More professional cameras tend to have the SD card on the side of the grip, and I highly prefer that. But I will say, before I had ever had a camera that had the SD card placed here on the side, I never had any issues or problems or complaints having the SD card in the same spot as the battery. But once you do have a camera that has an SD card on the side of the grip, you get spoiled pretty quickly, or at least I did, and a lot of other people do as well. So if you've never experienced that, you probably won't have a problem with it. If you have, you probably already know. And then as far as the lens mount, we have the RF mount, which is Canon's new mirrorless full frame lens mount, which has some awesome lens options, but you can also get the EF to RF adapter, which lets you seamlessly use any EF or EFS lenses, which are the lens mounts from Canon's DSLR lines that have much more options available, and a lot of them at much cheaper prices. So you have kind of the best of both worlds, because either way those lenses are going to function completely natively. As far as photography goes, I will put it plain and simple, this camera is mind-blowing for the price point. This is a full frame camera under $1,000. When I got this, it was actually priced at $899, and for what you get for that price, there is no complaints to be had here. You get stunning professional image quality and great colors out of this tiny powerhouse of a camera. You get super fast and accurate autofocus anywhere on the screen. You're not limited like you would be if you were using a DSLR. 26.2 megapixels is plenty for almost every use purpose. Printing huge sizes, definitely being able to crop in, especially if you're posting on social with most of your photos, you can still crop in a ton and have plenty of resolution for those platforms. The low light for this price point is amazing. You're getting full frame quality in low light. Now, this is not the best low light performance for a modern full frame camera, but it's also like half or a third or even less the price of most of the other full frame cameras that it's competing with. So what you get, again, for this price point is mind-blowing. You're going to be able to get really good quality results in the darkest of settings that most people are going to be shooting in. Again, at this price point, most of the competition is going to be smaller size sensors anyway. So for this budget range, the low light performance on this camera is nothing but an asset. Now, to be fair, this is not an action camera. Sports, wildlife, it can certainly track fast movement with the autofocus, but the slower, 2.6 frames per second, that's not fast at all. I would not suggest this camera to anybody who is looking for something to photograph action. The biggest con I can probably think of is this kind of disappointing shutter sound. Now, seriously, the biggest complaint about this camera is easily the battery life. I will say that if you're someone who needs to be shooting for long periods of time and can't change batteries during a shoot, this is probably not going to be for you. But if you are able to change batteries every hour or a couple hours or something like that, get some extra batteries and you should be fine with this. Another thing I want to point out for photography is, again, the size of this camera. If you want something that's just easy to throw into just a regular bag, not even a camera bag, or something where you're not sure if you're allowed to bring in a professional camera, or you know you're not allowed to bring in a professional camera, it's going to be much easier to get in with this camera and say like the RF 35mm than a bigger setup. And I would be comfortable taking that in that situation because I know that I'm still going to get really good quality out of the photos that I get. So again, keeping the price in mind, it's really hard to complain about this camera. Now, if you've heard complaints about this camera before, most of those complaints have probably been about video. And before anything else, I will say that this is a mainly 1080 camera, and it is pretty great for a 1080 camera, especially full frame again at this price point. However, we do have a 4K option here. Now the 4K again does have a 1.74 times crop. That's a pretty huge crop, a little bit more than APS-C. It also loses dual pixel autofocus in that mode, so you're left with using a much worse contrast-based autofocus system. However, small sensor size, contrast-based autofocus, that sounds a lot like the GH5, which has been one of the most popular 4K cameras for several years. And the sensor size that we're filming on with this camera is actually bigger than a micro four thirds camera. So does that make this a better 4K camera than the GH5? But seriously, this is not what I recommend if you have to have a 4K camera. I will say again, the 1080 looks really great in this camera. You have 24 frames so you can film at that kind of cinematic look. You also have 60 frames so you can slow it down to 40% and get some nice slow motion. It doesn't have the 120 frames super slow mode. I actually really like 60 frames per second, and all of my slow motion I do in 60 frames per second, but they give different feels. It's a personal preference and something that you're gonna have to get used to either way. Now for more professional video, you only have the more compressed IPB codec here. You don't have all-I. There's no options to film in a log format, but if you're filming more professional video, you should probably invest more in your camera than this. And I think at this price point, again, most people are going to be using this for video, like certainly home videos, YouTube videos, social media videos, and for that, I think the IPB video on this camera is actually really great. You're gonna get smaller file sizes and still really great video, good quality, and good colors. And a few really cool video features that you get here is, first of all, just great image quality. You have eye autofocus and eye tracking in video. We have the fully articulating flip out screen, which again, just objectively gives you the most versatility in the angles that you can see what you're filming from. Now we don't have in-body image stabilization in this camera, which of course would have been really nice, but we do have for video, a digital image stabilization, 2 modes actually. The first mode is just the enabled, and it just crops in a little bit, and it takes a lot of just those micro jitters that you have from hand holding video out, and it actually works pretty well. There's also an enhanced mode. I don't particularly like the enhanced mode because it crops in so much, but it's there if you need it, and you can certainly play around with it and see which one you prefer. So to sum it all up, the video features, the video quality, the performance you get for this price point is really hard to beat. So who is this camera for? I think if you are someone who is right now using a entry-level DSLR or entry-level mirrorless camera and is looking to upgrade to a full-frame camera, this is a great option for you. But I also think if you are looking at potentially an entry-level, like something like the Canon Rebel T8i or something in that price point, because of the price, I think the Canon T8i goes for like $850 right now, and I just got this for $899. I don't think there's any reason to save that $50 and get the Rebel camera versus going with the RP because of just the crazy amount of image quality and features that you get from this camera versus what you would get in the Rebel line. But I think past entry level, there's also a lot of people who would be really happy with this camera. Anyone who's looking for a small but quality travel size camera, anyone who's looking for full frame quality on a budget, anyone who's looking for a great hybrid camera or a great content creation camera that's full frame on a budget, certainly YouTubers and vloggers that are looking for a full frame setup that's compact, and professional photographers who are looking for either a backup full frame camera or just a compact full frame setup. I think this is a great option. I honestly think that the RP at this price point makes a lot of the entry-level smaller sensored cameras pretty irrelevant, especially for photo. Now for video, of course, some people are still gonna spec hunt and think that they have to have a 4K or now maybe even an 8K camera if they wanna make videos. And especially, again, the entry-level market is obviously not necessary, but of course, there are used full-frame DSLR options that you could look into, but for me, the features that you get in this camera as a mirrorless camera, specifically and especially the autofocus performance, just blows away anything that you could get for a DSLR in this price range. Another thing to really keep in mind is that lenses play a much bigger role in final image quality than the camera body does. And with the RP at this price point, you're going to be able to put much more of your budget towards better lenses, and doing that is going to give you much better results that you're going to be much happier with than if you were to put more of your budget towards a camera body and less toward lenses. So this is definitely not a perfect camera, and I know that most of what I said has been positive, but that's because of the price point. At this price point, for what you get, it is really hard to complain. And again, this isn't the perfect camera, but I think in this budget range, it is going to be the perfect camera for a lot of people. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you're interested in this camera or any of the gear that I talked about in this video, I'm going to leave affiliate links in the description down below. If you use those links without any extra cost to you, you can support this channel so that I can continue to make videos for you guys. In the comments below, let me know, what do you think about the RP? Is it worth the price? Is it not worth the price even at this budget? Tell me below. If you haven't yet, hit the subscribe button. See you guys.